In the farmlands of rural Iowa, where corn stretches to the horizon and family names last for generations, 74-year-old Harold Brennan had spent his entire life building something that mattered. 320 acres of prime agricultural land, passed down through 3 generations, worth $1.2 million in today's market. It was his legacy, his retirement, his children's future. And on a cold November morning, police would find him standing in his barn, shotgun in hand, with the body of his 28-year-old caregiver lying motionless in the hay. The woman was Melissa Carver, hired 2 years earlier to help Harold with daily tasks as his health declined. She had cooked his meals, managed his medications, driven him to appointments. She had called him Mr. Brennan, with respect, and smiled when neighbors stopped by. What Harold discovered, what would drive him to pull the trigger, was that Melissa had been systematically forging documents, falsifying signatures, and preparing to transfer ownership of his entire property into her name. Before this story shows you how trust becomes theft and theft becomes murder, hit subscribe. What happened to Harold Brennan is happening to elderly landowners across America right now, and most of them never see it coming until it's too late. Harold's family had farmed this land since 1891. His grandfather broke the soil with horse-drawn plows. His father survived the Dust Bowl and the Depression by sheer stubborn refusal to quit. Harold himself had worked those fields for over 50 years, planting in spring, harvesting in fall, weathering droughts, floods, and market crashes that destroyed weaker farms around him. By the time Harold reached his 70s, his body had started failing in the ways farm bodies do. Knees destroyed from decades of climbing equipment, back bent from lifting feed sacks, hands gnarled from arthritis. His wife, Margaret, had died 6 years earlier from cancer, leaving him alone in a 4-bedroom farmhouse that felt too big and too quiet. His 2 children, a son in Des Moines and a daughter in Minnesota, visited occasionally but had their own families, their own careers far from agriculture. They urged Harold to sell the farm, move into assisted living, take it easy. Harold refused. This land was not just property. It was identity. It was proof that the Brennan name meant something. But by late 2022, Harold could no longer manage alone. Simple tasks, cooking breakfast, remembering medications, driving to town, became difficult and sometimes dangerous. After he accidentally left a stove burner on overnight, his son insisted on hiring help. That is how Melissa Carver entered his life. She arrived through a local caregiving agency with decent references and a warm, professional demeanor. 28 years old, claiming to have grown up on a farm herself, Melissa seemed perfect for the role. She understood rural life. She did not mind the isolation. She knew how to cook hearty meals and was comfortable around livestock and machinery. Harold liked her immediately. She reminded him of his daughter when she was younger, hard-working, respectful, quick to laugh. Within weeks, Melissa had become essential to his daily routine. She arrived every morning at 7, prepared his breakfast, sorted his pills, handled phone calls from his kids, and took care of household tasks that Harold could no longer manage. What Harold did not see, what he had no reason to suspect, was that Melissa Carver had been hired under a false name. Her real background included multiple short-term caregiving jobs that had ended quietly, with elderly clients later discovering missing cash, forged checks, or unexplained withdrawals from their accounts. She had never been charged because the thefts were small enough and the victims too confused or embarrassed to pursue legal action. But this time, Melissa was not thinking small. This time, she had found an elderly widower sitting on $1.2 million in farmland, isolated from his family, increasingly dependent, and legally vulnerable. This time, she was going to take everything. The first year passed without incident. Melissa was reliable, kind, and helpful. She drove Harold to doctor appointments, picked up prescriptions in town, and kept the house cleaner than it had been in years. Harold's children were relieved. Their father was being cared for by someone competent, and they could focus on their own lives without constant worry. But during that first year, Melissa was studying. She watched where Harold kept important documents. She noted when his children visited and when they called. She learned his routines, his habits, and most importantly, his vulnerabilities. Harold's memory was slipping, not dramatically, but enough. He repeated stories. He forgot conversations. He sometimes lost track of what day it was. Melissa began testing small things. She asked Harold to sign receipts for groceries, then slipped other papers into the stack, authorization forms for household expenses, documents granting her limited power of attorney for medical decisions. Harold signed them without reading carefully, trusting that Melissa was helping him stay organized. By the second year, Melissa escalated. She contacted a lawyer in a neighboring county, presenting herself as Harold's niece helping him update his estate planning. She brought documents she claimed Harold had signed, expressing his wish to transfer property into a family trust that she would manage. The lawyer, operating in good faith and seeing official-looking signatures, began preparing the paperwork. If you have an aging relative living alone, especially one with property or savings, keep watching. The tactics Melissa used are the same ones predators across the country use to drain elderly victims, and they work. Melissa also began isolating Harold from his children. When his son called, she sometimes claimed Harold was napping or too tired to talk. She suggested to Harold that his kids only cared about his money, planting seeds of paranoia. She told him his daughter had once mentioned selling the farm the moment you're gone, a complete lie that nevertheless stuck in Harold's increasingly confused mind. At the same time, Melissa started appearing in town with Harold more often, introducing herself to bank staff, county officials, and neighbors as his caregiver and assistant. She positioned herself as the person who handled Harold's affairs, building a public perception that she was legitimate and authorized. In spring of the second year, Melissa made her boldest move yet. She brought Harold a stack of papers, claiming they were updates required by the county for property tax purposes. Buried in the middle was a quitclaim deed, a legal document transferring ownership of Harold's 320 acres from him to her. She had practiced forging his signature for months. This time, she didn't even need him to sign. She did it herself and had it notarized by someone she paid off in a distant town. The forged deed was filed with the county recorder's office. Legally, on paper, Melissa Carver was now listed as the owner of the Brennan family farm. But she did not act on it immediately. She needed time. Time for Harold's memory to deteriorate further. Time to create more documentation showing she had been caring for him like family. Time to prepare a story that would hold up when his children eventually questioned things. What Melissa did not account for was Harold's stubbornness. Despite his age and declining memory, he still reviewed his mail carefully. And one afternoon in late October, a routine property tax statement arrived addressed to Melissa Carver, owner, for the address he had lived at for 74 years. Harold stared at the envelope for a long time, confused. Then he opened it. Then he read it again. And then the confusion turned into something colder, realization. Harold did not confront Melissa immediately. He was old, but he was not foolish. Farm life had taught him patience, observation, and the value of knowing exactly what you were dealing with before you acted. He placed the tax statement in a kitchen drawer and said nothing. Over the next several days, Harold began quietly searching his own house. He found documents he did not remember signing. He found paperwork with his name on forms he had never seen. In a locked drawer in his bedroom, one Melissa did not know about, he kept copies of his original property deed, his will, and other critical documents. He compared signatures. The forgeries were good, but not perfect. Harold called the county recorder's office and asked a simple question. Who was listed as the owner of his property? When they told him Melissa Carver, his hands started shaking. Then he called his son in Des Moines. The conversation was difficult. Harold's memory gaps made it hard to explain clearly, but he managed to convey the core issue. Melissa had stolen his land. His son was skeptical at first, thinking his father might be confused. But when Harold read the property tax statement over the phone, his son went silent. Then he said he was driving out the next day and bringing a lawyer. Harold agreed. But he also made a decision that night, sitting alone in his farmhouse, staring at the land his family had worked for 3 generations. He was not going to let Melissa walk away. The next morning, Melissa arrived at her usual time. Harold greeted her normally, ate the breakfast she prepared, and acted as though nothing had changed. Around mid-morning, he suggested they walk out to the barn to check on some equipment. It was early November, cold and gray, the kind of morning where fog hung low over the fields. Melissa agreed without hesitation. She had no reason to suspect Harold knew anything. Inside the barn, surrounded by decades of farm equipment, hay bales, and the smell of oil and dust, Harold finally spoke. He turned to face her, his expression cold and steady. "I know what you did, Melissa. I know about the deed. I know you forged my signature. I know you've been stealing from me for 2 years." Melissa's face went pale. For a moment, she tried to deny it, stumbling over explanations. Then she shifted tactics, her voice turning sharp and defensive. "You signed those papers, Harold. You just don't remember. Your memory is going. Everyone knows it. I never signed anything giving you my land," Harold said. "And my son is coming today with a lawyer. You're going to jail." Melissa's expression hardened. "You can't prove anything. The documents are legal. I have witnesses. You're a confused old man, and no one will believe you." Harold stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the workbench along the barn wall. Melissa watched, confused, as he reached behind a stack of old toolboxes and pulled out a shotgun, a 12-gauge he had owned for decades, used for scaring coyotes away from livestock. He loaded 2 shells. If you're still watching, hit like now. What happens in the next 60 seconds will show you how quickly betrayal turns into violence, and how an old man defending his legacy becomes a killer. Melissa's eyes widened. She took a step back, hands raised. "Harold, wait. Let's talk about this. We can fix this. I can transfer everything back. Just put the gun down." "You had 2 years to do the right thing," Harold said. His voice was calm, steady. "You chose to steal from me. You chose to lie to my face every single day. You tried to take everything my family built. Harold, please." He raised the shotgun and fired. The blast was deafening in the enclosed barn. Melissa was thrown backward, hitting the hay bales and collapsing to the ground. Harold stood motionless for several seconds, the gun still raised. Then he lowered it, walked to where she lay, and checked for a pulse. There was none. He set the shotgun on a nearby hay bale, walked back to the house, and called 911. His voice on the recording was quiet, factual, almost emotionless. "This is Harold Brennan. I just shot the woman who was stealing my farm. She's dead. I'm at my house. I'll be waiting." Sheriff's deputies arrived 12 minutes later. They found Harold sitting on his front porch, hands folded in his lap, waiting. He did not resist when they approached with guns drawn. He simply stood, turned around, and allowed himself to be handcuffed. Inside the barn, they found Melissa Carver's body exactly where Harold said it would be. The shotgun was nearby, unloaded. There were no signs of struggle beyond the shooting itself. This was not a fight. It was an execution. Harold was arrested and transported to the county jail. He was read his rights. He said he understood. When detectives asked if he wanted to make a statement, he said only this: "She stole my land. I got it back the only way I could." News of the shooting spread quickly through the small Iowa community. Reactions were mixed. Some neighbors expressed shock. Harold had always been quiet, respectful, the kind of man who helped others without asking for anything in return. Others were less surprised. In rural farming communities, land theft is one of the most personal violations imaginable, and there was a grim understanding that Harold had been defending more than property. He had been defending his family's entire legacy. Harold's son arrived that afternoon as planned, but instead of meeting with a lawyer to reclaim the farm, he was meeting with his father through jail cell bars. The son was devastated. He understood why his father had done it, but he also knew the consequences would be severe. Investigators began piecing together Melissa's scheme. They subpoenaed records from the county recorder, the lawyer she had used, and the notary who had certified the forged quitclaim deed. Each piece of the puzzle revealed the same thing: a systematic 2-year effort to steal an elderly man's property through fraud, forgery, and manipulation. Phone records showed Melissa had researched estate law, property transfer processes, and elder exploitation tactics. Her search history included phrases like "how to transfer property without family knowing" and "elderly memory loss legal capacity." Detectives also discovered Melissa's real background. She had worked under multiple names across Iowa and neighboring states, targeting elderly clients through caregiving agencies. Small thefts at first, cash, jewelry, but escalating over time. Harold's farm was her biggest target yet, the score that would have set her up for life. Don't click away now. The next chapter shows how the legal system handles a man who killed to protect what was his, and whether a jury would see him as a criminal or a victim who fought back. But none of that changed the fundamental legal reality. Harold Brennan had killed another human being. Not in self-defense. Not in the heat of passion. He had armed himself, confronted her, and pulled the trigger. Under Iowa law, that was murder. Harold's trial began 6 months later. The prosecution's case was straightforward: premeditated murder. Harold had retrieved a weapon, loaded it, confronted Melissa in the barn, and shot her when she posed no immediate physical threat to him. The state argued that regardless of Melissa's theft, Harold had legal options: police, lawyers, courts, and instead chose to kill. The defense told a different story. They painted Harold as a victim of elder exploitation, a man who had been systematically defrauded for 2 years by someone he trusted. They presented the forged documents, the stolen deed, the financial manipulation. They brought in experts on elder abuse who testified that victims often feel powerless against sophisticated scammers who exploit trust and cognitive decline. The defense also highlighted Harold's state of mind. He was 74, living alone, increasingly isolated from his children, and watching his memory fade. When he discovered that the one thing he had left, his family's land, had been stolen, something broke. It was not legal justification, the defense admitted, but it was human. Witnesses testified about Melissa's pattern of targeting elderly clients. Former employers described how she had left previous jobs under suspicious circumstances. One elderly man testified that Melissa had worked for him briefly and that after she left, he discovered forged checks totaling $8,000. He had not pressed charges because he was embarrassed and unsure how to prove it. The prosecution countered that none of this excused murder. They showed crime scene photos of Melissa's body in the barn, read Harold's emotionless 911 call, and argued that he had acted with cold calculation, not passion or desperation. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was a compromise: guilty of second-degree murder, not first-degree. They found that Harold had not planned the killing in advance, but had acted in the moment when confronted with the full weight of Melissa's betrayal. It was still murder, but it acknowledged context. The judge sentenced Harold to 25 years in prison. At 74, it was effectively a life sentence. He would die behind bars. In his final statement before sentencing, Harold addressed the court. "I spent my whole life on that land. My grandfather, my father, and me. 3 generations. That land was all I had left to give my kids. When she took it, she took everything. I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry it came to that." The courtroom was silent. Some people nodded. Others looked away. Harold Brennan died in an Iowa State prison 3 years into his sentence. He was 77. The official cause of death was complications from pneumonia, but those who knew him said he simply stopped fighting. Without the land, without his purpose, there was nothing left. The Brennan family farm was returned to his estate and divided between his children. Neither wanted to keep it. The memories were too painful, the association too dark. They sold the property within a year to a neighboring farming operation. The house was demolished. The barn where Melissa died was torn down. 320 acres of Iowa farmland, worked by 3 generations of Brennans, now belongs to strangers. The family name exists only on old county records and a gravestone in the town cemetery. Melissa Carver's story became a case study in elder exploitation. Advocacy groups use her scheme as an example of how predators target isolated elderly landowners, exploiting trust and cognitive decline to steal property worth millions. New legislation in Iowa now requires independent legal review before property transfers involving individuals over 70, a law informally known as Harold's Law. Harold's children have become advocates for stronger protections. They speak at community meetings, warning other families to watch for the signs they missed: isolation tactics, sudden document signings, unexplained legal changes. They describe their father not as a murderer, but as a victim who fought back the only way he knew how. The legal community remains divided. Some see Harold's case as a tragedy, a man driven to violence by a predator who exploited his vulnerability. Others see it as a dangerous precedent, arguing that property theft, no matter how egregious, never justifies killing. In rural Iowa, where land and family legacy are woven into identity, opinions skew toward understanding. Farmers who have worked the same soil for generations recognize what Harold felt when he discovered his land had been stolen. They do not necessarily condone what he did, but they understand why he did it. The Iowa farmland continues to produce corn and soybeans each season, just as it has for over a century. The soil does not care about deeds, theft, or blood spilled in a barn. It simply grows what is planted and waits for the next harvest. But for those who knew Harold Brennan, the land will always carry his story, a reminder that trust, when weaponized, can destroy lives. And that sometimes, the people we invite into our homes to help us are the ones who take everything we have left. If this story made you think of someone you know, an aging parent, a grandparent living alone, a relative with property, share this video. Elder exploitation is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, targeting billions of dollars and destroying families. Subscribe for more true crime stories that reveal how predators operate and what warning signs families need to watch for. Thanks for watching.